My name is Jessica Bennett, and I can still see that old house in Richmond, Virginia, in my mind as clearly as if I had just left it. It wasn't a grand place. In fact, it was rather plain, a squat, gray bungalow at the end of a quiet street lined with tired maples and cracked sidewalks. The front steps always creaked, and the screen door rattled when the wind blew. For as long as I could remember, it was home. Or at least I thought it was. On the morning of my 18th birthday, I woke up expecting maybe a little kindness, a card, a warm breakfast, a hug. Something to mark the moment I stepped into adulthood. I tiptoed down the narrow hallway, the faded carpet cool under my feet, the familiar smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. I could hear Helen and Mark talking in low voices. They always seemed to be whispering about something when they thought I wasn't listening. When I walked into the kitchen, they stopped talking. Helen stood by the sink, her arms crossed over her chest. Mark sat at the table, staring at a spot on the wall as if it held some secret message. Neither of them looked at me. I smiled anyway, just to break the ice. "Good morning," I said. "It's my birthday." Helen didn't smile back. She glanced at Mark, and he finally stood up. I saw his hands were shaking a little as he slid a plain envelope across the table toward me. "Sit down, Jessica," he said, his voice clipped and tense. My stomach twisted. I sat. Helen looked at me then, but there was no warmth in her eyes. She just looked tired, maybe even a little angry. "We need to talk," she said. "Things have been hard. You're 18 now. We can't take care of you anymore." The words hit me like a punch. I stared at them, not sure I'd heard right. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask. My voice sounded small. Mark couldn't look at me. "You're an adult now," he said. "You need to go out and create your future." He kept his eyes on the wall. "We've done everything we could for you." Helen nodded, as if this was something she'd practiced saying. "It's time for you to leave, Jessica." I didn't cry, not then. I just sat there, numb, as Helen pushed the envelope closer. "There's $50 in there," she said. "It's all we can give you. Good luck." I stood up. My knees felt weak, like they might buckle under me. I didn't bother to argue or ask questions. Maybe I already knew that it wouldn't change anything. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with everything that wasn't being said. I went back to my small room and packed the few things I owned into a worn-out backpack. Some clothes, a toothbrush, my sketchbook, and a faded photograph of me as a little girl on the swings in the backyard. I stood in the doorway one last time, looking around at the posters on the wall, the stack of books on my nightstand, the way the morning sun slanted through the blinds and made stripes on the floor. It was all so ordinary, and yet, in that moment, it felt like a chapter of my life was closing for good. When I came back out, Helen and Mark were standing by the front door. Helen opened it for me, her face unreadable. "Take care of yourself," she said, almost mechanically. I stepped out onto the porch, feeling the weight of the backpack pulling down on my shoulders. Mark closed the door behind me, softly but firmly, and that was it. No hugs, no tears, just the sound of the door latching shut. The world outside felt huge and cold. The late autumn wind stung my cheeks as I started walking down the street, away from the only home I'd ever known. My hands trembled, clutching the straps of my backpack. I had nowhere to go, no plan, just $50 and the clothes on my back. It was terrifying, but it was also strangely freeing, like a bird shoved out of the nest before it learns how to fly. I wandered aimlessly at first, my feet carrying me through the city I thought I knew so well. The faces around me were strangers, busy and unbothered, everyone moving fast, lost in their own lives. I found myself near the bus station by midday, watching people buy tickets and climb aboard, off to somewhere else. I thought about leaving Richmond right then, but I was scared. So, instead, I stayed, walking the streets until the sun started to set and my stomach growled with hunger. That first night was the hardest. I found a quiet spot behind a row of dumpsters behind an old diner on Broad Street. I wrapped myself in my jacket and tried to sleep, but the cold crept in and made my bones ache. I listened to the hum of traffic, the distant shout of someone arguing, the soft scurrying of rats looking for scraps. When I got too hungry, I checked the trash cans for anything edible, a half-eaten sandwich, some cold fries, even a bruised apple. I ate what I could, pushing away the embarrassment and shame. Pride doesn't fill your belly. The days blurred together after that. Every morning, I woke up stiff and sore, shivering from the cold. I washed my face in public restrooms, tried to keep myself looking as normal as possible so no one would notice how lost I was. Sometimes, I'd find shelter in the library, sitting for hours among the books, pretending to read just to stay warm. Other nights, I curled up in the shadows of abandoned buildings or under bridges where the city lights didn't reach. I learned which places were safe and which were not, which people might offer a little kindness, and which ones to avoid. I learned to ignore the pitying stares and the way people hurried past, pretending not to see me. I learned how to survive. Despite everything, I held on to hope. Maybe it was foolish, but I kept telling myself that something would change, that all of this was just the beginning of my story, not the end. Every day was a struggle, but I forced myself to keep moving, one foot in front of the other. I had nowhere to go but forward. If you had seen me then, shivering in the cold, eating out of garbage bins, you might have thought I was just another lost girl with nowhere left to turn. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. And even though I didn't know it, the day was coming when my whole life would turn upside down again. But for now, I was alone in Richmond, a new adult with nothing but $50 and the will to survive. The first weeks after leaving Richmond slipped into months, and then into years. Looking back now, those 4 years are like a long road stretching through the back streets of America, sometimes dark and frightening, sometimes filled with small, golden moments of hope. I learned to survive in ways I never imagined possible. I left Virginia after that first cold winter, hopping a cheap bus out of town and heading north with nothing but my backpack, a few tattered bills, and the desperate wish that things would get better somewhere else. My journey took me through city after city, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and then New Jersey. I walked when I had to, took buses when I could, and hitched rides with strangers on rainy nights. I slept on benches in train stations, in quiet corners of public libraries, and, sometimes, in cramped, noisy homeless shelters where I clung tightly to my backpack all night. I took whatever work I could find, washing dishes in diners, sweeping floors in old hotels, picking up trash in city parks for a few dollars a day. Some days, the only payment I got was a meal, but that was enough to keep me going. New York City became my final stop, not because I wanted to be there, but because my feet just wouldn't carry me any farther. The city was impossibly loud, bright, and crowded. At first, it overwhelmed me. I learned quickly that New York doesn't care about you. It doesn't care if you're tired, hungry, or lost. But I also learned that in a city of millions, you could disappear. That was both terrifying and strangely comforting. My favorite place was Central Park. In the summer, I'd sit under the big oaks with my sketchbook, drawing the faces of people walking by or the way the sunlight hit the leaves. Sometimes, tourists would stop and watch me work. Once, a little girl and her mother bought one of my sketches for $5. I smiled and thanked them, and for a moment, I felt seen, not as a homeless girl, but as an artist, if only for a few minutes. Most days, though, were hard. I was always hungry. I ate stale bagels and cold pizza slices that I found in the trash behind busy coffee shops. When it rained, I'd huddle under scaffolding, pulling my jacket tight around me, watching the city rush by in a blur of umbrellas and taxicabs. I watched people live their lives, go to work, argue on their cell phones, laugh with friends, and fall in love, always from the outside looking in. It would have been easy to give up hope. Some days I almost did, but something deep inside wouldn't let me. I told myself that the world was bigger than my troubles. I dreamed of things changing, even if I didn't know how or when. I believed that I could be more than just a girl without a home. Then everything changed. It was a bitterly cold afternoon in November. The sky hung low and gray, threatening snow. I was sitting on a bench near Times Square, watching the lights flicker on the giant screens and the endless stream of people surge by. My shoes were worn thin, and my fingers were numb. I drew in my sketchbook just to keep my hands moving. I'd drawn the silhouette of a tall man crossing the street, his coat billowing behind him like a cape. Suddenly, I heard voices calling my name. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I saw them. 3 men in expensive suits weaving through the crowd, looking straight at me. They stood out against the chaos of Times Square, perfectly pressed, not a hair out of place. Their shoes shone so brightly I could see my reflection, tired and smudged with city dirt. The tallest of the 3, a man with red hair and blue eyes that seemed too kind for the businesslike way he held himself, spoke first. "Are you Jessica Bennett?" he called, his voice carrying over the din of traffic and street performers. I froze, clutching my backpack to my chest. No one had called me by my real name in years. On the street, I was just Liv, or sometimes, "Hey you." My heart pounded in my ears. "Who's asking?" I managed to say, my voice shaky but trying to sound tough. The man held up a wallet, flashing a business card that said David Pierce, attorney at law. He crouched down beside the bench, so he could look me in the eyes. "Jessica, we've been searching for you for a very long time. Your father, your real father, has been desperate to find you." My brain went blank. I thought it was some sort of cruel joke, or maybe a scam. I looked at the other 2 men, both holding out folders full of papers, their faces serious. "I don't have a father," I said, barely above a whisper. "He left me a long time ago." David shook his head gently.
"No, Jessica.
"You were stolen, taken from the hospital as a newborn. Your father, Charles Bennett, has never stopped looking for you." He handed me the folder. Inside, I saw photographs, some old, some new. There was a picture of a baby in a hospital crib, swaddled in a blue blanket, a little plastic bracelet on her tiny wrist. The name tag read, Jessica Bennett. My birthday was printed right there. My hands started to shake. The lawyers showed me more, news clippings, police reports, a faded photo of a younger Charles Bennett, holding a baby and smiling with pride. There were letters, hundreds of them, sent to agencies all across the country, begging for help in finding a missing daughter. For years, these men had been searching, following dead ends and false leads, but never giving up. I didn't know what to believe. Part of me wanted to run. I was used to people not wanting me, not the other way around. But there was something in David's eyes, a deep sadness and hope mixed together, that made me pause. "We're here to take you to your father," he said softly. "He's waiting for you in Manhattan." For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the photos and papers in my lap. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. Could this be real? Was it possible that I wasn't who I thought I was all along? The lawyers waited patiently, not pushing, letting me decide. Finally, I nodded. I was tired of running, tired of being alone. Maybe, just maybe, I could find out the truth about who I really was. As I followed them through the busy streets, I glanced up at the glowing lights of Times Square, and for the first time in years, I let myself hope that I was about to find something I'd been missing my whole life. Not just a family, but a place where I truly belonged. The city was different that day, or maybe it was just me who was different. I barely noticed the traffic or the crowds as the lawyers led me into the heart of Manhattan. The glass towers loomed overhead, their reflections shimmering against the late afternoon sky. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, even as I tried to press them together in my lap to look calm. All the while, my mind spun with impossible questions. Could this really be happening? Was I about to meet my real father after all these years? We reached a tall building with gold letters spelling out Bennett Holdings above the doors. I followed David and the other lawyers through a marble lobby, past men and women in expensive suits who barely glanced at me. Everything inside was polished and silent, the kind of place where my dirty sneakers and old jacket felt out of place. But nobody said a word about it. David led the way to a private elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. I could feel my heart pounding up, the floor numbers lighting up one by one. When the elevator doors slid open, I stepped out into a sunlit corridor. The walls were lined with art, oil paintings of cities and landscapes, each one more beautiful than the last. At the end of the hallway, Two glass doors opened into an enormous office. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a view of Manhattan that took my breath away. The city spread out beneath us, endless and alive, with the sun shining on the skyscrapers and the distant silver thread of the Hudson River. There was a man standing in front of the windows, his back turned to us. His hair was silver, almost white, and his suit looked as though it had been tailored just for him. When he turned around, his eyes met mine, and in that moment I knew. There was something about the set of his jaw, the color of his eyes, the way his expression softened when he saw me. For the first time, I saw myself reflected in someone else. He took a step toward me, then another, and then he was close enough for me to see the tears brimming in his eyes. "Jessica?" His voice broke on my name. I nodded, unable to speak. All the fear and doubt I'd been carrying seemed to melt away in that moment. He reached out, almost hesitantly, as if he were afraid I might disappear. "My daughter," he whispered, and then he pulled me into his arms. I don't remember how long we stood there. For a moment, I was just a little girl again, wrapped in a hug so fierce and full of longing that it made my chest ache. The lawyers quietly stepped out, closing the doors behind them. My father, my real father, held me as though he could make up for 18 lost years in a single embrace. When we finally sat down, he handed me a handkerchief, and I realized I was crying too. I had spent so many nights wishing for someone to come and find me, to claim me as their own. Now it was real, and I didn't know what to do with all the feelings crowding in. He introduced himself as Charles Bennett. "I've dreamed of this moment since the day you were taken from me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He showed me an old photograph he'd kept in his wallet all these years, a picture of a baby girl, just a few hours old, wrapped in a hospital blanket. I recognized myself immediately. "I never gave up hope," he told me, his eyes shining. "Not for a single day." And then he told me everything. I learned that the people I'd called Mom and Dad, Helen and Mark, were not my parents by blood. The truth was far more complicated and heartbreaking than I ever imagined. When I was only a few days old, I was stolen from the hospital in Richmond. The police searched for months, but there were no leads. My father hired private investigators, detectives, even journalists to follow any rumor, any whisper of a missing child. He spent millions of dollars, not because he was rich, though he was, but because he couldn't let himself stop. "A parent's love doesn't disappear," he said. "It just grows stronger the longer you're apart." Helen and Mark had wanted a child so desperately, Charles explained, that they made an unthinkable choice. They raised me as their own, hiding me away from the world. For years, I wondered why I didn't look like them, why I never quite fit. I always sensed something was off, but I never suspected this. I asked him why Helen and Mark had let me go at 18, and Charles shook his head, sadness in his eyes. "Maybe guilt finally caught up with them," he said quietly. "Or maybe they knew the truth would come out eventually. Either way, they left you at your most vulnerable. I am so sorry for everything you've endured." He gave me time to ask questions, and I had hundreds. Some he could answer. Others he couldn't. I asked about my mother, my real mother, and Charles showed me a locket with her picture inside. "She was gentle, bright, and brave," he said softly. "She passed away when you were just a baby. Losing you nearly broke me, but I promised her I would never stop searching." As I listened, a strange feeling grew inside me. Grief for the years we had lost, anger at Helen and Mark, confusion about who I really was. But above it all, there was a fierce, bright hope, a sense that my life was starting over, this time with truth instead of lies. And then, as if to remind me how much my world had changed, Charles explained what it meant to be a Bennett. He told me about the family fortune, worth over $2 billion, spread across America and Europe, with businesses, properties, even a small art museum in Paris. It was impossible to imagine. All those years I spent wondering where my next meal would come from. I had never dreamed that my real family was searching for me from the highest towers in New York. But Charles wasn't interested in the money. He didn't try to impress me with stories of wealth. Instead, he wanted to know about me, my art, my struggles, my dreams. He listened to every word, as if it were the most important thing in the world. That night, as the city lights twinkled far below the office windows, I sat with my father, sharing stories, asking questions, and listening to the truth I had been denied for so long. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel lost or invisible. I felt seen. I felt loved. And as I looked out at Manhattan, my new world, I promised myself that I would find out what it truly meant to be Jessica Bennett. If anyone had told me a year before that my whole life could turn around in a single day, I would have laughed. Back then, hope was just something I scribbled in the margins of my sketchbook, a word I tried to believe in when the world felt too heavy. But learning the truth about who I really was changed everything, not only on paper or in a bank account, but deep inside, in the quiet places I never dared to show anyone. After meeting my father, Charles Bennett, everything moved so quickly that it felt unreal. I moved into his home on the Upper East Side, a stately brownstone with tall windows, a doorman who learned my name on the first day, and rooms so spacious I often found myself wandering, amazed by the echoes of my footsteps. My new bedroom had a balcony overlooking the city, with a view that made even the tallest buildings feel close enough to touch. There was a bathroom just for me, with marble counters and soft towels, and a closet big enough to be a room on its own. Sometimes I'd stand in the middle of it all, barely able to breathe, half expecting someone to wake me and tell me it was all a dream. But the house wasn't empty. For the first time, I felt the presence of family everywhere. My grandmother, Evelyn, flew in from London as soon as she heard I had been found. She was a tiny, regal woman with silver hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief. She wrapped me in a hug so warm it melted the last bit of frost from my heart. She told me stories of my mother, her daughter, and made me laugh with tales of my family's adventures in England, stories about summers in the English countryside, and Christmases by the Thames. My Uncle Daniel came from Boston, tall and boisterous, always with a joke or a new book under his arm. He showed me pictures of my cousins, Sophia, who studied music in Paris, and Andrew, who worked at a tech startup in Chicago. Suddenly, I had a whole network of people rooting for me, welcoming me into their lives as if I'd always belonged. I had missed so many birthdays, holidays, and quiet Sunday dinners, but they never made me feel like an outsider. Instead, they listened to my stories, the hard ones, the sad ones, the ones I'd kept buried for so long, and they made space for me, both in their hearts and their homes. Life in Manhattan was nothing like the world I'd known before. I was enrolled at Columbia University before I could even catch my breath, given the opportunity to finally study art, my greatest passion. Walking through the campus, surrounded by students with books and coffee cups and plans for the future, I felt nervous and excited, like a beginner in a world I'd only ever seen through the window. I took classes in drawing, sculpture, and art history. My days were filled with the smell of paint and the sound of laughter. My professors encouraged me, and for the first time, I began to believe that my talent was worth something. But it wasn't just about the money or the privilege, or the beautiful house, or even the famous last name. I found that what mattered most was the freedom to be myself, to learn who I was beneath all the old wounds and layers of survival. With every passing day, I felt myself healing. The pain of being abandoned, the cold years of loneliness and hunger, they didn't disappear, but they became a part of my story, not the whole of it. New York City became my home in a way that Richmond never was. I loved walking through Central Park early in the morning, sketchbook in hand, watching the city wake up around me. I would see young girls sitting on benches, sometimes huddled beneath old jackets, and I recognized that look in their eyes, a mix of fear and stubborn hope. Whenever I could, I would offer them a smile, sometimes a few dollars, or even just a kind word. I wanted them to know they weren't invisible. I knew what it was like to have nothing, to feel forgotten, to wonder if life would ever change. Slowly, I began to give back. I started volunteering at a community center in Harlem, teaching art classes to kids who needed a safe place to create and dream. Their laughter and energy brought me back to life. I understood their struggles because I had lived them, and that made my victories feel all the more precious. I wasn't just Charles Bennett's daughter. I was Jessica, The girl who survived, who learned to dream again, who wanted to help others do the same. My father encouraged me in everything. He attended my first student art show and bought my favorite painting for a ridiculous amount, laughing when I scolded him for bidding against my professor. He never missed a family dinner, always making time to talk with me about anything, school, art, even the nights I couldn't sleep because old memories kept me awake. Our bond grew stronger every day, rooted not in blood alone, but in forgiveness and love and the knowledge that life gives second chances to those who never give up. As months passed, I found myself letting go of my anger towards Helen and Mark. Forgiveness wasn't easy, and it didn't mean forgetting. They had stolen me from the life I was meant to have, and yet, in their twisted way, they sheltered me, however broken it was. With my father's help, I found the courage to write them a letter, not with hatred, but with understanding. I needed to free myself from the past, to move forward and build the life I deserved. Now, when I look out at the city lights from my balcony, I know who I am. I am Jessica Bennett, an artist, a survivor, a daughter, and a friend. My journey wasn't what I expected, and I wouldn't wish my hardships on anyone, but I know that those dark days shaped me. They gave me a compassion I might never have learned, and a gratitude that colors every brushstroke I make. Sometimes I still walk by the places where I once sat alone, shivering and scared, and I think of all the lost girls still out there, waiting for their story to begin. If I can, I stop and talk with them, share a little hope, a little warmth, a little money. I tell them, in the gentlest way I can, that life can change, sometimes when you least expect it. I am the lost daughter of a billionaire, but my wealth is not in dollars or pounds. It is in love found, hope restored, and the knowledge that no matter how lost you feel, you can find your way home. And that is my story.